The clinking of cutlery had just faded when Maria realized something unusual about tonight's dinner. Her husband's family had gathered more formally than usual, her mother-in-law at the head of the table, her father-in-law sitting stiffly beside her, and her husband across from Maria, avoiding her gaze. The air felt charged, as though the laughter that usually filled family meals had been packed away for the night. Maria adjusted her napkin in her lap, a small knot of unease forming in her chest. Finally, her mother-in-law cleared her throat, her tone carrying the weight of a well-rehearsed speech. "Maria," she began, folding her hands neatly, "we've been thinking, with your salary, it's only fair that you share half with the family. After all, we are all in this together." The words struck Maria like cold water. She blinked, not sure if she had heard correctly. Half of her salary? The money she earned from staying late at the office, from waking before dawn, from pushing through exhaustion just to keep climbing? Her eyes flicked to her husband. He shifted uncomfortably, then leaned forward, almost apologetically. "They mean well, Maria. You know, it's family. They just need a little help." Maria's chest tightened. The weight of the moment pressed down on her, heavier than the silence that followed. She had always known marriage was about compromise, but this didn't feel like compromise. It felt like being stripped of her choices, her sacrifices reduced to a number on a paycheck. And as the entire table waited for her answer, Maria realized she stood at the edge of a decision that would change everything. As the silence deepened around the table, Maria's mind slipped away from the present. The voices of her in-laws grew faint, replaced by echoes of another time, her own journey, carved from struggle and sacrifice. She remembered those nights in her tiny apartment during college, when she'd come home from the diner after a double shift, her uniform smelling of grease, her feet aching. She'd sit on the floor with her textbooks, fighting sleep while calculating how much of her next paycheck could go toward tuition. Then came her younger brother, Daniel. He'd call her, embarrassed, confessing he couldn't afford his books for the semester. Maria never hesitated, she picked up another job at the grocery store just so he wouldn't have to give up on his dreams. She never told him she often skipped meals so he could eat better. And then there was her mother, the strongest woman Maria had ever known, lying weak in a hospital bed. When the doctors handed her the bill, Maria didn't even flinch. She drained her savings, every last penny, because her mother's heartbeat was worth more than any number in her bank account. Through it all, Maria never complained. She gave and gave and gave again, because kindness was stitched into her very being. She believed in lifting others, in carrying burdens that weren't her own. But tonight, sitting at that long wooden table, something felt different. This wasn't about love or survival. This was about entitlement. And for the first time in her life, Maria felt her generosity being treated not as a gift, but as an obligation. Her chest ached with the weight of realization. She had always given freely, but now, they were trying to take. Maria's gaze drifted back to the table, where her husband leaned toward her, his voice soft but pressing. "It's family, Maria," he murmured. "They need us. You know how hard things have been." Those words, "they need us," should have stirred her compassion. Once, they would have. But tonight, they echoed strangely in her chest. She studied the faces around her. Not one of them looked at her with gratitude, or even humility. No, what she saw instead was expectation. Entitlement. For a moment, her throat tightened, and she wondered if maybe she was being selfish for resisting. But then, like a lantern in a dark room, clarity struck her. She remembered what family had always meant to her, late nights at the hospital, holding her mother's hand. Whispering encouragement to her brother as he cried over tuition he couldn't afford. Family was sacrifice, yes, but it was shared sacrifice. It was standing shoulder to shoulder, fighting storms together. This was different. This wasn't family asking with love, it was family demanding, as though her sacrifices were their right to claim. And in that instant, Maria realized something she had never allowed herself to say out loud. Her worth was not in her paycheck. Her value was not a number to be divided. Every dollar she earned represented hours of lost sleep, the ache in her back, the resilience that kept her moving when she wanted to collapse. Her salary wasn't just money, it was the story of her life's battles. And suddenly, she knew, she could no longer allow anyone, even those closest to her, to rewrite that story as their own. The room was heavy with silence, the kind that seemed to press against Maria's skin. Everyone's eyes were on her, waiting. Her husband's family leaned forward slightly, as if expecting her to nod, to surrender. But Maria felt something rising in her chest, a strength that had been silent for too long. She placed her napkin gently on the table and stood, her chair scraping softly against the floor. Her voice was steady, though her heart pounded. "I need you to hear me," she began. "Every dollar I earn comes from my sweat, my late nights, my tears. I've given all my life, to my mother when she was sick, to my brother when he needed school, to strangers who had nothing. I gave because I wanted to, because that's who I am." She paused, her eyes sweeping the table. No one moved. "But what you're asking of me now," she shook her head slowly, "this isn't love. This isn't family. Family doesn't demand. Family doesn't measure affection in paychecks. Family respects the sacrifices behind what is given." Her husband opened his mouth as if to speak, but Maria held up a hand. "I will always give when I choose to. Out of kindness. Out of love. But make no mistake, my choices are mine. My worth is not for you to divide." Her words rang through the room like a bell. No one dared to interrupt. Even her mother-in-law, always quick with sharp words, sat frozen, lips pressed tightly together. For the first time that night, Maria saw something different in their faces, not entitlement, but shame. Her husband lowered his eyes, unable to meet her gaze. And as Maria stood there, unflinching, she realized something powerful. She was no longer just defending her paycheck, she was defending her dignity, her independence, her voice. The last word was hers. And it was final. In the weeks that followed, the echo of that family meeting lingered, but not as a wound. For Maria, it became a turning point, a moment when she chose herself, when she discovered the strength of her own voice. Instead of funneling her salary into demands, she poured it into dreams. She set aside money for a scholarship in her mother's name, determined to help young women who reminded her of herself, hardworking, overlooked, but burning with potential. She began mentoring at a local community center, guiding girls who doubted their worth, reminding them that their value was not tied to anyone else's approval. Each act of giving was different now. It wasn't out of guilt. It wasn't out of pressure. It was out of freedom. One evening, while Maria was leaving the community center, a teenage girl she had been mentoring ran up to her and hugged her tightly. "Because of you," she whispered, "I believe I can finish school." Tears welled in Maria's eyes. That moment, that spark of hope in someone else's life, was worth more than any paycheck she'd ever earned. At home, her husband began to change, too. Slowly, he came to understand that respect is the foundation of love. He apologized for not standing beside her that night. And though healing took time, Maria felt a quiet shift. Her voice had not only transformed her, it had begun to transform those around her. Maria's journey became more than a personal victory. It became a reminder to everyone who heard her story. True strength is not in how much you give up, it's in knowing when to stand tall. True generosity isn't demanded, it's chosen, freely, from the heart. And as Maria looked at the life she was building, she realized something profound. She hadn't just had the last word that night. She had spoken the first word of a new chapter, one filled with respect, purpose, and hope.